It's chapter 7. It turned out the paper I'd found was the ghost's confession, or at least, it was the confession of someone named Arabella Crowley, written in 1837, a date that roughly matched the spectre's clothes. It seemed she'd smothered her husband in her sleep, and she'd gotten away with it. Her guilty conscience had kept her spirit from its rest. Now the document had been found, and her crime revealed, the ghost was unlikely to return. That was my interpretation anyway. Lockwood took no chances. The following morning he had the fragments of the window pane incinerated in the Clerkenwell furnaces, and he encouraged Mrs. Peters to have the wardrobe broken up as well. Slightly to my annoyance, he repeated his orders to me not to try communicating with the visitors that weren't safely constrained. Of course, I understood why he was so cautious. His sister's fate loomed heavily over him. But to my mind, he'd overstated the risks. I was increasingly confident that my talent could bypass such anxieties. Over the next few days, new cases for Lockwood Co. continued to come in thick and fast. Lockwood, George, and I continued tackling them separately. This led to problems. For a start, our hectic schedule meant that we had little time to research any job in advance, an omission that was always dangerous. One night, Lockwood was nearly ghost-touched at the church near Old Street. He had cornered a phantasm beside the altar and almost missed a second one creeping up from behind. If he'd read up on the history of the church beforehand, he would have known that it was haunted by murdered twins. Fatigue was an issue too. George was ambushed by a lurker he hadn't spotted near Whitechapel Lock, and only escaped by jumping headfirst into the canal. I fell asleep during a stakeout in a bakery and totally missed a charred ghost emerging from the oven. The sudden smell of roasted meat woke me just as it was reaching for my face with blackened fingers, much to the amusement of the whispering skull, which had been watching from its jar, but it hadn't said anything. Our narrow escapes bothered Lockwood, who saw it as yet further proof that we were undermanned and overworked. No doubt he was right, but I was more interested in the freedom that my solitary expeditions gave me. I was waiting to make proper psychic connection with a ghost, and it wasn't long before I had precisely that opportunity. My appointment was with a family in flat number 21, South Block, Bermuda Court, Whitechapel. It was the tower block case, the one I'd been lumbered with because of the Bagsy rule. It had been postponed twice due to a client illness, and I nearly couldn't take it on the third time either, because I'd already booked a train to go home to see my family. I hadn't set eyes on my mother or sisters since coming to London 18 months before, though I viewed the trip with mixed feelings. Lockwood had given me a week's holiday, uh, and I wasn't going to rearrange that job that involved climbing lots of stairs. I'd agreed to pop in the night before I left. Lockwood and George were busy with other cases, so I took the skull along. It provided company, of a disagreeable, unsavoury sort, if nothing else. It jabbered and helped keep the silences at bay. Bermuda Court proved to be one of those big, concrete estates they'd built after the war. It had 4 blocks arranged around a grassy yard, which with external stairs and walkways running around the sides. The walkways acted as protection against the weather, but also cast the doors and windows of the flats into perpetual shadow. The surface of the concrete was rough and ugly, dark with rain. As I'd predicted, the lifts were out. Flat 21 was the only one on the 5th floor, but I was out of breath when I arrived. It was only on the 5th floor, but I was out of breath when I arrived. My rucksack, weighed down by a certain jar, was killing me. The light was almost gone. I took a rasping breath and rang the bell. "Man, you're unfit," the skull said in my ear. "Shut up, I'm in good shape. You're wheezing like an asthmatic sloth. It wouldn't help to lose a little weight. Like that bit on your hips Lockwood's always going on about." "What? He doesn't. But at that moment, the clients answered the doors. There was a mother, gaunt and greying, and a large, silent, slope-shouldered father, and three small kids, all under 6, living together in the flat with 5 rooms and a narrow hall. Until recently, there'd been a 6th person too, the kid's grandfather, but he died. Slightly to my surprise, the family didn't usher me into the lounge, which is where such awkward conversations usually take place. Instead, they led me to a tiny kitchen at the end of the hall. Everyone crowded in. I was pushed so tight against the stove, I twice pressed its ignition switch with my bottom when I heard their story. The mother apologized for the uncomfortable surroundings. They did have a living room, she said, but no one went in after dark. Why? Because the grandfather's ghost was there. The children had seen him every night since he'd died, sitting in his favourite chair. What did he do? Nothing. Just sat there. And beforehand, when he was alive, mostly sat in that self-same chair where he wasted away from the sickness he'd refused to get treated. He'd been skin and bones at the end, so light and papery you'd think a draught would have carried him away. Did they know why he'd returned? Nope. Couldn't even guess what he wanted. And what had he been like when he was alive? After that, there'd been a lot of shuffling. The silence told me much. He was a difficult man, the father said, not generous with his money. He was tight and grasping, the mother added. Would have sold us to the devil if the devil offered cash. Sad to say, but it was true. They were glad he'd gone. Of course. But he hadn't gone. Or if he had, he'd come back. They made me tea, and I drank it, standing under a single bright light in the kitchen, with the children's eyes as wide and green as those of cats, staring up at me. At last I set the cup down at the sink, and there was a sort of collective sighing. The moment had now come. With that, they showed me to the living room. I stepped through onto the worn carpet and closed the door behind me. It was a rectangular room, not large, centred on the electric wall fire. A metal guard ran around the hearth to keep the kids away, and I did not switch on the light. A wide window looked out over the grassy waste ground behind the estate. There were lights on in the other blocks, and an old neon street light, left over from the times when ordinary people went out at night, on the path below. Its glow gave the shape to my surroundings. The furniture was a kind that had been fashionable a couple of decades back. Hard, high-backed chairs with jutting armrests and spindly wooden legs, a low, stiff-sided sofa, side tables, plain glass cabinet in the corner. A deep pile rug had been arranged before the fire. Nothing quite matched. I saw the kids' games stacked in another corner and sensed they'd tried to tidy up for me. It was chilly in the room, not ghost chilly, not yet. I checked the thermometer on my belt, 12 degrees. I listened, but caught only a noise, like distant static. I carried my bag over to the sofa, below the window, and set it quietly down on the floor. The jar, when I pulled it out, was glowing the palest green. The face rotated slowly, eyes glinting with the plasm. Poky little gaff, the voice whispered. Wouldn't fit many ghosts in here. My fingers hovered over the lever in the jar's lid that would cut off communication. If you've got nothing useful to say... Oh, I'm not knocking it. It's a hell of a lot tidier than your place, that's for sure. They say that this is where it happens. And they're right. Someone died in here. The air stained with it. You sense something else, then you let me know. I set the jar down on the side table. Then I turned to face the high-backed chair opposite. I already knew it was the one. You could guess from its domineering position, the way it sat closest to the TV, in the corner, closest to the fireplace. All the other seats were less conveniently situated. Uh, then there was the walking stick propped up against the wall in the shadows beyond, the little side table marked with mug rings. The chair itself was decorated with some god-awful flowery pattern. The fabric had been worn white on the armrests and repaired with leather patches near the ends. There was a dirty bald mark halfway up the back too. The sponge of the seat cushion had been compressed thin with a long usage. It was almost as if someone still sat there. I knew what I should do. Agency practice was clear. I should get out the chains, or, failing that, a sensible amount of filings, and carefully encircle the chair. I should set up leather crosses. Apologies. I, I said this before we started, but I was making hot sauce earlier and pretty much mustard gassed myself with the vinegar in it. So I'm struggling a bit, but we'll get through it. Um, Filings and carefully encircle the chair. I should set up lavender crosses as a secondary barrier and place myself at a safe distance from the likely manifesting point. George would certainly have done all that. Even Lockwood, always more cavalier, would have whipped up a chain circle in double quick time. I did none of those things. I went as far as loosening the strap of my rapier and opening my bag so that my tools were near at hand. Then I sat on the sofa in orange-pink darkness, crossed my ankles, and waited. I wanted to test my talent. Naughty, the skull said in my mind. Does Lockwood know you're doing this? I didn't reply. After a few more jibs, the ghost fell silent. Beyond the door came muffled noises, kids being told to shush, clinks of crockery, sounds of an evening meal being made. The smell of toast permeated the air. The family was so close by. In theory, I was endangering them by not putting out defences. The Fitz manual was very clear on this. DPRAC rules expressly forbade contact without adequate protection. In their eyes, I was committing a crime. Outside the window, the night grew black. The clients ate their meal. The children were ushered into one of the bedrooms, toilets flushed. At the sink, someone was doing the washing up. I sat quietly in the dark, waiting for the show, and it began. Slowly, insensibly, a malign atmosphere began to invade the room. I heard the change of the quality of my breathing. It was taking quicker, shorter gulps of air. The hairs on my arms prickled with disquiet. Doubt rose within me, also anxiety and a strong feeling of self-loathing. I took some gum, chewed steadily, and made the usual adjustments to counteract the malaise and creeping fear. The temperature dropped. The reading on my thermometer showed 10 degrees, then 9. The quality of the light altered. The neon glow became fuzzier, as if struggling through treacle. Something's coming, the skull said. I chewed and waited. I watched the empty armchair. At 9:46 precisely, I checked my watch. It was empty no longer. A faint outline became visible in the centre of the chair. It was very weak and scuffed and smudged in the middle, like a pencil drawing improperly rubbed out. You could see what it was, though, the shrunken figure of an old man sitting there. He exactly fitted the contours of the worn sponge seat and the outline of the headrest. Uh, it rested precisely over the grubby, bald spot in the back. The apparition remained transparent, and I could see every detail on the appalling flowery pattern of the cushions behind, but steadily its features grew more certain. It was a very small, shriveled man, bald except for long, white hairs straggling behind his ears. I guessed he had once been fat, round-faced even. Now the flesh on his cheeks had fallen in, leaving the skin hanging empty. His limbs had wasted away. The fabric of his sleeves and trousers hung horribly flat. One bony hand lay cupped amid the folds and looseness. of the old man's lap. The other curled at the end of the armrest like a spider. He'd been a wicked thing, that was for sure. Everything about him projected a discomforting malice. His eyes glittered like black marbles. They were staring fixedly at me, and there was the faintest smiles of it on his thin lips. My every instinct told me to defend myself, bring out the rapier, lob a salt bomb or canister of iron, do something to get the presence away from me. But I didn't move, and neither did he. We sat on our seats and stared at each other across the thick rug and the gulf that separates the living from the dead. I had my hands folded in my lap. I cleared my throat. "Well," I said finally, "what is it you want?" No sound, no reply. The shape sat there, eyes shining in the dark. Over on the side table, the skull in the jar remained silent and shrouded too. Only the faintest green haze behind the glass showed that it was present, watching. Without the protection of iron chains, the full chill of the apparition tore into me. The temperature at my belt was down to 7 degrees, and it would be colder still near the chair. But the degree of cold isn't really the point. It's the type. It's where it comes from. Ghost chill is a fierce, dry cold. You can feel it sucking the life and energy from your bones, and I bore it. I didn't move at all. I just stared at the old man. "If you have a purpose," I said, "you might as well tell it to me." Just the silence and the glittering of the eyes, like starlight in the dark. No real surprise. It wasn't a type 3, scarcely even a type 2. It couldn't speak, couldn't communicate in any obvious way. But even so, "No one else is going to listen," I said. "Better take this chance while you can." I opened my mind, tried to empty it of sensation, see if I detected anything new, even an echoing mess of emotion, like the one I'd got from the changer at Lavender Lodge, might be enough to set me on the right track. From the chair came a scratchy rustling of fabric, a picking sound, like the cloth being teased and pulled by the tip of someone's fingernail. I heard shallow breathing, a person murmuring under their breath. My skin crawled. I couldn't take my eyes off the smiling apparition in the chair. The sounds came again, muffled, but very close. "What is it?" I asked. "What is it you're trying to tell me?" A crash in the corner. I sprang up in fright, grabbing for my rapier. The ghost was gone. The chair was empty. The squashed seat, the worn patch, everything exactly as it was before, except for the walking stick, which had toppled over, cracking against the fireplace. I checked the time, then rechecked it was something like alarm. 10:20? That was weird. According to the watch, the apparition had been present for more than an hour and a half, or half an hour, and yet it had scarcely felt like a minute to me. "Did you get it?" The skull's voice jerked me back into action. The face in the jar had re-emerged, nostrils flaring smugly. "Bet you didn't." "I did. I know, and I'm not telling." "What is it with you?" I said. "You're like a toddler. Yes, of course I got it." I rose, crossed to the door, and switched on the light, ignoring the shrill protests from the jar. The evil atmosphere had vanished from the room. Under the ceiling light, the outdated shabbiness of the furniture was revealed in all its muted orange and browns. I looked at the stack of kids' games, Scrabble, Monopoly, and the Rotwell Agency's Ghost Hunter. That one where you have to remove the plastic bones and bits of ectoplasm without setting off the buzzer. Battered boxes, second-hand games. The house of an ordinary family without much cash. He was a difficult man, not generous with his money. I walked over to the chair. "You haven't a clue, have you?" the ghost called. "Tell you what, let me out of this jar, and I'll happily spill the beans. Come on, Lucy, You can't argue with that for a deal. Don't try to flutter your eyelashes at me. It doesn't work with empty sockets. I bent beside the chair, inspecting the nearest armrest. The patch at the end was made with some kind of imitation leather, more plasticky than anything. It had been roughly sewn into the original fabric, but in places the stitches had come undone, and one corner was curling up, like the edge of a stale sandwich. I pushed at it, experimentally, slid my fingers underneath and lifted. There was a layer of foam stuffing which came away easily. Then you could see the tightly wound wads of banknotes compressed down in the space beneath. I grinned at the skull over my shoulder. Sorry, looks like there's no deal for you today. The face grimaced and vanished, and then a starburst of peeved plasm. That, the voice said, lingering, was just a lucky guess. I took my holiday and went back north to the town where I was born. I saw my mother, I saw my sisters. I stayed with them for a few days. It wasn't the easiest of homecomings. None of them had ever travelled more than 30 miles away in their lives, let alone had gone to live in London. They looked askance at my clothes and shining rapier, and frowned at the smallest change to my accent. The scent of the scent and aura of the city hung around me. I spoke with the assurance they didn't recognise about places and people that meant nothing to them. For my part, I found them slow and hidebound by their fear. Even the good weather, they went out only reluctantly. Even in the good weather, they went out only reluctantly. Evening saw them cowering by the fire. I grew impatient, and crosser still when they scarcely argued back. There was something in their sheep-like resignation that made me want to scream. What kind of life was this, to sit dumbly in the dark, living in fear of death? Better to go out and face it head on. I left them a day earlier than I'd planned. I had an itch to get back to London. It was an early morning train. I sat in the window seat, watching the tapestry flash by, the fields and woods, the spires of hidden villages, the chimney stacks and ghost lamps of the ports and mining towns. Everywhere you looked, the problem hung invisible over England. Brand new cemeteries and crossroads in wild abandoned places, crematoria on the edges of cities, curfew bells in market squares. Superimposed upon it all, my face blurred in and out of view. I glimpsed the child that I had been when I first came to London, and the operative I'd now become, a girl who spoke with ghosts, more than spoke, who understood their desires. My encounter with the miser's ghost had changed everything for me. It had been a strange sensation I felt afterwards, walking back through Whitechapel with all my tools still on my back, all those unused flares and canisters jangling at my belt. I hadn't needed any of them. I dealt with the visitor without resorting to weapons or even defences. No salt, no lavender, not an ounce of iron spilled. How many times in any agent's career has successful investigation ended in quite so neat a way? The old man in the chair had been unpleasant, and his ghost still radiated that blackness of his soul. Yet he'd come back with a coherent purpose, a desire to make restitution, to reveal the hidden money to his heirs. My calm interrogation had given him a chance to do precisely that. If I'd blasted him in the usual way, the outcome would not have been possible. But I'd done it by giving my talent free rein. There were obvious dangers attached to my new approach, but great advantages too. And as I gazed out of the window, a new way of working began to open up in front of me. The skull in the jar was still an exceptional case, the type 3 ghost with which I was able to communicate fully with. But I was coming to believe that there were other ways of bridging the gap between ordinary visitors and the living. My hunch relied on two things: that many ghosts had the same objective or had some objective in returning, and that, if you calmly sought to discover this, that they would leave you long enough to find that out. The first part of the statement was uncontroversial. It had been accepted since the days of ghost hunting pioneers, Marissa Fitz and Tom Rotwell, 50 years before. But the second part flew in the face of orthodox opinion. Every modern agency sought to constrain the ghost as a matter of first principle, and when it was done, the source could be found and destroyed, thus removing the ghost as well. It was universally assumed that the ghost would resent this process and seek to prevent it. Since an angry ghost could quickly kill you, agents weren't inclined to mess about. In some cases, weapons were certainly necessary. Could the terrible thing in the attic at Lavender Lodge ever truly have been reasoned with? Almost certainly not. But others, I thought of the sad shades thronging in the boarding house, the veiled spectre in the bedroom window, that were desperate for connection. And I could prove that, however imperfectly. What I needed was for Lockwood to let me experiment some more. He would be resistant, naturally so, because of what had happened to his sister, but I felt I could bring him around. At this thought, my mood lifted. The bulb of sadness I'd been nurturing since visiting my mother shrank deep inside and was forgotten. I would talk to Lockwood and George about my ideas when I got home. Back in London, I asked the cab to stop by Arif's store at the edge of Portland Row and bought a selection of iced buns. It was past 11. Lockwood and George would be just about ready to hit the sack by now. I was back a day early, since they wouldn't be expecting me. I could make my arrival an extra nice surprise. But there was a surprise waiting for me when I entered the house. It made me stop in amazement, keys held frozen in my hand. The hall had been vacuumed, the coat rack tidied, the rapiers, umbrellas, and walking sticks arranged in size order in their pot. Even the crystal skull lantern on the key table had been dusted and polished so that it shone. I couldn't believe it. They'd actually done it. They'd tidied. They had tidied for me. I put my bag down softly and tiptoed into the kitchen. They were in the basement by the sounds of it, and they were in very good mood. I could hear their bubbling laughter even from the kitchen. It made me smile to hear them. Perfect. The buns would go down well. I didn't hurry. I made a pot of tea, put the buns in our second best plate, I couldn't find the best one, and arranged them so that Lockwood's favourites, the ones with almond icing that he rarely allowed himself, were on top, and set everything neatly on the tray. I opened the door with my foot, nudged it wider with my hip, and pattered lightly down the iron stairs. Happiness bloomed inside me. This was what it was all about. Portland Row was my home. My real family was here. I ducked through the arch of the office and stopped, still smiling. There they were, Lockwood and George, bent forward attentively on either side of my desk. They were laughing heartily. Between them, sitting in my chair, was a shapely, dark-skinned girl. She had black hair, worn long at the shoulder, a pretty roundish face, and a kind of dark blue pinafore dress with a nice white top underneath it. She looked very new and fresh and skinny, like someone had popped her out of a plastic case that morning. She sat straight-backed and elegant, and didn't seem particularly discomposed by having George and Lockwood draped so close. On the contrary, she was smiling too, and laughing a little bit. Mainly, though, she was listening to the boys laugh. On the table were 3 mugs of tea, and also our best plate, scattered with the remains of several almond buns. I stood there, looking at the 3 of them, holding the tray. The girl saw me first. "Hello," she said in a mildly inquiring sort of way. George's head jerked up. The fatuous grin on his face at once shrank to non-committal blankness. Lockwood's smile tightened. He gave an odd little skip, a sort of sidling sidestep backwards, and then moved hastily towards me. "Lucy, hello! What a lovely surprise! You're back early. How was your trip? Nice weather, I hope." I stared at him. "So," he said, "good journey? Oh, more buns. How lovely. There's a girl, I said. A girl sitting in my chair. Oh, don't worry. This is only until the new desk arrives. He gave a light laugh. It should be tomorrow, Wednesday at the very latest. Nothing to worry about. We didn't expect to see you so soon. A new desk? Yes, for Holly. He cleared his throat, smoothed back his hair. Well now, where are my manners? It's the time for introductions. Holly, this is Lucy Carlyle, the perfect agent who you've heard so much about. And Lucy, Lockwood gave me his biggest smile, let me introduce you to Holly Munro, our new secretary. And that's the end of chapter 7. The end of the part as well. That's a part 2 over. We got part 3 coming up, and then let's see how many parts do we have. Apologies. Anyway, we've got more. I think we have at least, what part's that? 5. Aye, we'll go up to part 5. So we're on part 3. We've got 2 more parts, and then I'll leave it. But thank you for listening, and hope you enjoyed.